Everyone, welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams. Let me apologize right now because y'all might hear my dog in the background. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say that. We still, with Brian and I, if you notice, we haven't um, been on because we've had life. And both of us moved. Both of us had projects that we had to do. And it was just way too much. So,
Yep, and a new job, all that fun stuff.
right, new
But we've
job.
we have thoroughly missed you guys. So happy to be back. Um, and I thought I would actually kind of briefly talk about the project that I'm working on. Because I like to take a minute to do a shout out. So I am been hired by the University of Virginia Foundation to research the descendants of a plantation called Birdwood, which was owned by William Garth, who died in 1860. So I am actively doing the paper trail research. I've identified a lot of the families, enslaved people, finding descendants all over the country. But as with anything to do with genealogy, there are a lot of difficult people to find, lots of name changes, all that kind of fun stuff. If you're hearing the sound of my voice, you believe that your ancestors were enslaved at Birdwood Plantation or by the Garth family of Albemarle County, Virginia, generally, and in and around Charlottesville specifically, I would absolutely love to hear from you. And you can send me an email at briansheffy@gmail.com. It's as simple as that. We'd just love to hear from you. And I'm going to ask to keep it really, really specific to William Garth. He is the man who built Birdwood, the enslaver of some 80 people towards the end of his life. Earlier stages of the project, I will be looking at his siblings and his great aunts and uncles and aunts and uncles and all of those people. But for the time being, it's William Garth. So as I said, I would absolutely love to hear from you. And with that in mind, so today we are going to be talking about the uniqueness of African American genealogy. And I know you're probably laughing and going, you guys talk about that almost every week. And we do. We touch on different aspects of why our genealogy is different. But Donnie and I both thought it would be a really cool idea to actually have a show where we just talk about how our ancestry is different, because our ancestors' history in this country was different, whether they were free people of color, whether they were enslaved African Americans. It's a unique story, it's a unique history, and it has impacts on how, once we get past the 1870 census, it has a real impact on the records we look for, why we have to look for certain kinds of records, and getting people to think about where those records are. So did I miss anything out there, Donya?
No. Let me go to the comments real quick because one thing, unless you didn't say this, Happy Mother's Day to everyone. All the moms.
Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, I came to that because I saw some on our thing. So we have we got our faithfuls, Angie Wilson and Randy. Hi, you guys. We have truly missed all of you very, very much. So yeah, let's get it going. Let's get it started. And thank you, Vicky, for saying Happy Mother's Day to me. I am a mom 4 times over. Real quick, my daughter get this whole joke. She did this real pretty thing to me on Facebook, talking about Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there, but especially to my mom and blah, blah, blah. And then she caveats it with, I think that I'll be over there. No, she says, I'll be over there later on to get my gift. And I'm like,
how does that work?
Right. She says that because she is the firstborn and that she made me a mom, she should get a gift.
I like the thinking.
She said all of the older children in the world should get a gift because they're the reason that moms are moms. Whatever. So
well, I noticed in the questions and the comments, someone did ask the question, what surnames associated with Birdwood? I'm a little bit reluctant to do it because there are a lot of very common surnames that are found amongst these enslaved people. And I just can imagine a lot of people are going to be like, oh, I've got family, in a neighboring county or Albemarle, but I can give you a couple. One of the more unusual ones is the surname is Skanks, Skanks. It is spelled all kinds of ways. Sometimes it's spelled Scanks. Sometimes it's actually spelled Shanks. This particular family ended up going to Fayette County, West Virginia, where the trail goes very cold for them. But I have managed to find a couple of kids, other surnames, and again, this is specific to Fayette County, West Virginia, would be Callaway and Ham, as in John Ham, Hamm. Other names are Barber, spelled Barber or Barbour. A little bit of confusion over how that name is spelled. And again, with these name things, it's this, and again, we're going to talk about this as well, probably in the show. We're talking about freedmen and women. Most of the people that I've been researching were illiterate. In the 1880 census, it said that they could not read, could not write, had never attended school, which for free people is not a huge shock or surprise. So they were doing the best that they actually could to spell the names that their surname that they were identifying themselves by. So that's why you get Shanks spelled 2 or 3 different ways, and then you get Skanks, which is also spelled differently. There's the Washington family, there's the Harris family, there's the Jones family. You can start seeing why I'm a little bit reluctant to start shouting out surnames, because as I said, they're very, very common ones. So I said, fascinating. To start off as African American, one line is now identifies as Hispanic. They go back to these people. They probably have no idea that they have African ancestry in any description. They identify as Hispanic, and another line identifies as white. They switched in 1920. Not going to shout out that surname because things like that have to be handled very sensitively, very carefully. But yeah, those are a couple of the surnames. And there is a tree on ancestry.com called the Birdwood Plantation Descendants Project. It's under my name, Brian Sheffy. If you know how to use member names, lookups on Ancestry, you can find the tree that way. So I hope I answered that question.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Where did you see that question at?
Towards the top. I don't really want to shout it. It's not a person's name. It looks like it might be a group, and I think you might have just blocked that person. Oh, yeah, you did.
Damn.
But it actually the first question he asked was, what are the surnames?
Oh, so he did. Because then Indians exposed and
Yeah. I noticed that. But yeah, whoever that was did ask that question.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you got it. Okay, let's get started.
So, I mean, the other reason why, and Donya, you can, people are saying someone's saying that they can't hear you very well. The other reason why, and Donya can chime in on this as well, that I think this is a timely discussion, is this continuing ridiculousness around what's identified as critical race theory, CRT, which you and I know is Black history. And in order to do Black genealogy, you have to know Black history. You don't know that. You don't know what was happening to your ancestors. You don't know what kind of records to look for. I really worry about the kind of younger generations of African Americans and Black Americans in a generation or two. If this kind of ridiculousness continues, how are they going to be able to research? They won't know how to research because they won't know the history of their ancestry, which kind of tells you where you need to look.
Well, we talking about CRT?
Yeah, we are.
Yes. No, I agree. Y'all, I hope you can hear me. I'm trying to get my thing, set up. Like I said, we have moved, so things are different, and just trying to get stuff done. But you're absolutely right. Not only do you need to know Black history, you need to know history so that you can put 2 and 2 together and understand what's missing in the mix of it. And that's the biggest part. in my
Mhm.
opinion.
And again, to use an example, I know that there's some correlations with white descended people in the 1930s around the Depression, the wholesale movement of people out of the Midwest because they lost their family farm. They couldn't pay the mortgage or loan or whatever it was. They couldn't afford to keep the family farm going, so all they could do is pack up the kids and the pets, put them in a car, and just hope for a better life somewhere else. Our history, we have many pulses of that in our history. So it's almost a reflex for me now. If I'm researching someone in the South, it could be anywhere in the South, and all of a sudden I lose track of an entire family or a couple of siblings around that 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940 mark, I immediately think the big migrations, those big pulses of migrations out of the South. But the only reason why I know that is because I know about the history of the Black migrations and the different pulses of that coming out of the South, going to the West, going to the North, going to the Midwest, just getting out, trying for a better life. And
Right.
in the course,
Can
and
you
in the
hear me?
course of, yeah, I can hear you. Can everyone else
Is
hear you?
that is that better? Is it louder?
It's louder for me.
Okay, good.
The other thing that I really value is just the amazing series of guests that we've had on over the 6 seasons of the show. People like Bernice Bennett and others talking about uh, oh, it's gone out of my head now. The
In her new
not
book,
the not the pioneers. Oh, what were they called? Homesteaders.
yeah, her
Finding
new
out
book.
about finding out about homesteaders, finding about homesteading records, finding out what led to that whole movement.
Right.
So now, if I do genealogy that touches on the Midwest or places where homesteading happened, um, again, it's like a Pavlovian response. Now I'm like, oh, okay, you're in Oklahoma, or you're down, not Texas. Texas didn't have homesteading. I'm thinking of trying to think of one of the other ones, Arkansas. It's like, yep,
Arkansas.
okay, I need to go start looking at the homesteader kind of papers and applications. Um, and again, that's while there is parity with other people who did those kind of moves around the country, for African Americans knowing about that part of our history, um, again, really helps you identify records. Um, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the delayed birth certificates.
Oh yeah. So yeah, that was going to be my next thing. So one of the things that I didn't realize until I started doing my research was the delayed birth certificates, or the lack of birth certificates for African Americans. This is why I say you don't just need to know your history. You don't need to just know Black history. You need to know your history. You need to understand why things are happening the way that they did. So, for example, you have South Carolina, and in South Carolina was doing death records, birth records, even for the Black people and everything. But there's a portion of South Carolina that they didn't start doing it until they were mandated. And it's not, I'm pretty certain that there are other states that was like that. So that becomes a problem. If you don't know when they were made to do that, then you don't you're having an issue finding certain information. You're having an issue knowing when someone had passed or anything. Brian and I both have demon um fire smoke alarms. We both have them. Demon smoke alarms. So if you guys hear a beep sound, that is what it is. It's the demon smoke alarms. We don't know why they keep doing that. We've changed batteries. His, I think, doesn't even have a battery in it, and it's still making that noise.
It's still chirping. So
So yeah.
I think a really good example is, we all have 4 grandparents. So of my 4 African American grandparents, 2 of them had birth certificates, 2 of them had delayed birth certificates. And they're all 4 born around the same. Well, my father's father was actually the oldest out of all four of my grandparents. He was born much earlier. Had my father very late in life. But of the four of them, two had birth certificates, two had delayed birth certificates. And I couldn't understand what the difference between the two were. That's because my mother's father was born in DC, so he was born in a hospital. My father's mother was born in Newport News, and she was born in a black hospital. Took a little bit of research to figure out that that was a black hospital, but I was able to do that. Now, my Edgefield grandmother on my mother's side, she was born in a very rural place and she was born at home. There were hospitals. She could have been born in a hospital, except for, what's those two words? Jim Crow. Black women were giving birth at home. So she didn't have an opportunity to have an original birth certificate. She needed a delayed birth certificate. Did it with another grandparent who was born in North Carolina, born in a very rural place, Jim Crow, born at home. So the only thing that he could do was get a delayed birth certificate.
But do
Back
you
when that
think
law,
that it was Jim Crow that caused that, or was it the fact that it wasn't even being given out? Like, I don't know about North Carolina. I know with South Carolina, once they were mandated to do it in 1915, that's when they started doing it. Do you think that it was the fact that because they weren't born in a hospital, that's why they couldn't get the birth certificate? Or do you think that it was just the fact that they couldn't get the certificate because they weren't giving it to them until it was made? So that's then why it had to become delayed.
that's a great question. I honestly don't know the answer to that one. I'm going to caveat that. I'm going to opine and assume that it's a combination of those factors, that it's not one kind of clean answer for that.
Betty says both. She says both. I mean, it, I think, Jim Crow has everything to do with it, because Jim Crow is the reason why they wouldn't give it out, period. So I can definitely see why she said both. Um, but it's just, I don't know. I don't know how to. It was just so weird to me because I thought I like that's the mistake in my book. If you guys have my book, that's the mistake in my book. I actually put in there that South Carolina as a whole did not do it. But then when my book was put to the NGS and they gave it a rating, they gave me I got a really great rating for it, and and everything. But she pointed it out that South Carolina did, and that was something that was wrong. So now I have to change it. I've changed it since. But the thing is that I thought it was all of South Carolina until I realized, oh, that's just where my people are from. They were really, really bad. And it was just weird.
Mm-hmm. So again, for the benefit of the audience, remembering, and I'm just taking a look at the website now, the Social Security Act was passed in 1935, 14th of August, 1935. So that date is so ingrained in my head now that when I'm researching African American family members, extended family members, and ancestors in rural parts of the South, I don't even try looking for a birth certificate for them.
That wouldn't be for a birth certificate, though. That's Social Security. So that's not the.
Yeah, but that's what prompted people to do the delayed birth certificates, because if you couldn't prove that you were an American citizen because you didn't have an original birth certificate, that's when they were forced to get the delayed birth certificates. Sorry, you were right. I kind of let that little piece of information out.
Wait a minute, Brian. The thing was, now they weren't mandated to 19. They were mandated 1915 for everybody, for as birth certificates were concerned. So, okay,
but again,
now I see what you're saying.
If you're Black, and more than likely in the South, in a rural place, chances are you're not going to get a county birth certificate. So I don't even look for them anymore. I mean, I do, but my first port of call for ancestors that I know were alive around 1935 and beyond, who were part of that earlier generation, delayed birth certificates, one of the first ports of call that I
So
do.
let me ask you another question then. Are they for you as you do your research on other people's stuff, and you might come across a delayed birth? You might, is it popping up? Is what I'm asking. Like
All the
now,
time.
now they're popping up. You finding a lot of birth certificates popping up in different areas, and whether
Oh,
we found out one person mom wasn't his mom because his birth certificate popped
true.
up. So,
No, I'm actually not finding a lot of original birth certificates. The ones I'm still finding, the ones that keep popping up, and I'm thinking specifically about parts of South Carolina on this one, delayed birth certificates. Georgetown County, Charleston County, Berkeley County, all of Williamsburg, all of those counties around there. Um, Depending on when your ancestor was, basically people who were born before 1925, I'm only getting delayed birth certificates for them
wow.
and
Okay.
nothing else. Mhm.
Okay. Well, we got a
Now,
lot of people that are having those same issues. Gina Lewis, um, she said the same thing, that she found that when she was researching her mother, her birth certificate was logged in a month later, which was delayed, and because of her being with a midwife. Henry Goins, he stated that he's only researched one delayed birth, and then Angie, she said her grandfather was born in 1910 in Mississippi and did not have a birth certificate. The Social Security application used the birth of his children to estimate his eligibility. That's crazy.
that is crazy. And I would be really interested in finding out how your grandfather proved that he was an American citizen, especially as a black man in
Yeah.
that time period.
Wow. And then Vicky said she said she's sure her grandfather didn't apply for his delayed birth certificate until he was 60 years of age. So he, that it's all crazy, the fact that the things that our ancestors, our family members had to do to become legal, even though they were here and their families were here prior to, just like everybody else.
Well, I'm going to give an example. My Edgefield born, moved to DC maternal grandmother, Pauline Matthews Turner, she falls in that category. She applied for her delayed birth certificate when she was 58 or 59, and she did it here in DC. And her Matthews ancestry, I mean, I've researched that enslaved line going back to the 1600s in Virginia.
Mm,
So it is kind of insulting to
it
prove.
is.
You're about what, going back to her line goes back about maybe 11, about 11, 10 to 11 generations. So those Matthews have always been here. Not all, well, they've been here since the late 1600s. And it is kind of insult to injury saying, yo, my ancestors have been here since like 1679.
That's right.
And I'm 58 years old, and you're asking me to prove that I'm an American citizen.
Exactly, exactly. Wanda Looney said that the midwives did not go to the courthouse but once a month in rural areas. And that's true. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the fact that even when the midwives did go, they still didn't weren't allowed to have the children that they bore, were not allowed to have birth certificates until, in some places, until they were finally made to do it for everybody. That's the sad part about it. You have Caucasian families who were here all this time, like Brian was just saying, and every time something new rolled out, they were right on top of it. They were able to get it. But for those black families that was here right along with them, they weren't able to get it. I mean, let's talk about it. The slave schedules weren't even done. The first census was taken in 1719. They didn't even decide to put us on a slave on a schedule, on a census, until 1850. So you had all of those census records taken beforehand, and we were never there. But yet we were there. And then the only reason that we were on those two census records, which were 50 and 60 is because now they get to count their enslaved people as themselves as far as a part of them as far as the electoral college was concerned, if I'm not mistaken.
Can I just finesse what you just said? I'm just going to finesse it a little bit. You are absolutely right in what you said in terms of the 1850 census. I'm going to say that that was the first time that enslaved people were listed like that
Yeah,
on the schedule. Because before that, if you look at the 1840, 1830, 1820, and 1810 census,
they were
they there
slaves.
is they it just counted the number of enslaved people.
That's it.
There was nothing else really. There was nothing else known about them apart from whether they were under a certain age. Sometimes it was 12, sometimes it was 16, or whether how many enslaved people were over those ages.
Hmm.
Um,
So you didn't get,
yeah,
even though you didn't get a name or on a schedule, you finally found out how many females or the
yeah,
age of the female, or
hmm
if they were if the census was set up at family groups, then you saw the family from oldest to youngest. Those were the things that you started. That's when you started to get some type of clarity. I mean, when I
yeah,
think about Rebecca Bug, she was listed she was listed on the 1840 census, but she was only listed as a how many free women of color in your house, because they had all the categories broken down. So it had
yeah.
free women of color, free or enslaved people. All of that was so then at that point she was only one of the however many free women of color was in that person's household at that time. That thankfully she was the only one. So it kind of, and because we knew who her quote unquote guardian was as opposed to enslaver, not that I feel that there's that much difference, but because we knew who her guardian was, we knew that was her. But that record doesn't count for anything because her name is not listed.
And really, I'm beginning to realize how few of those 1850, 1860 schedules actually grouped family groups together.
Not
When
all
they do,
states did it.
yeah,
Yep.
when they do, it's amazing, and you can actually work out entire family groups. But most of the ones I'm seeing lately, and when I say lately, since January of this year, has been a list of males from eldest to youngest, and then a list of females from
Hmm.
eldest to youngest. There's no indication in there about any family groups whatsoever.
I'm
And
gonna
those
be
those are
honest with you. South Carolina is the only. Well, that was one, and then it was another one that I saw. It was only like two or three that I've ever seen that actually did the grouping like that, and it was great. For me that they did that because, and then I also got lucky because Whitfield died the same time, the same around the same year the schedule was put out. So everybody that went on his inventory list was on his slave schedule. So I am very fortunate, and I know I feel like I'm one of the very rare people that can list the names of everybody under that enslaved person
Mhm.
because of the slave record book and his inventory. I can make that comparison. His inventory said 95. The number of people on the slave schedule under him was 95. I mean,
And
to a
I'm
T.
glad that it's like you read my mind. I'm
I
glad that you
was
mentioned inventories because I'm going to invite people to think about it. Inventories like this. Those were our enslaved ancestors' census records
right.
because they were named in those documents. So
Yeah, and
really,
the documents, yeah,
yeah. So in a way, Black people had a census, or enslaved African Americans had a census when
inventory
a lot
wasn't.
of a lot of poor white people
Mhm.
didn't, because
Right,
they were property, and like every other piece of property, they were listed on the inventory with their name. Sometimes they would have an age, but if you understand the valuations that were given back in the day, if you understand the $200 or maybe less than that, $50 back in the day was either going to be a very elderly person or was going to be a child, as
right. A
opposed to
baby.
a baby kind of a thing.
Hmm.
So again, you can kind of finesse that information. But that realization kind of hit me that really those inventories were our enslaved ancestors' census kind of enumeration. That's been a kind of a recent way for me to think about it.
Yeah, that's a better way to think about it. Raynette said they were following the instructions for how to enumerate them. They weren't supposed to be in family groups, particularly not in 1860. And she's definitely right because by 1860, I've never seen any 1860 slave schedule um, in family group order. I've never seen it, and I only saw it in, like I said, maybe in a couple of states for 1850. I didn't see it that much. Henry Goins, he said the plantation ledger that he read was much better than a census of the early years of the Republic. And let me ask you this, Henry, real quick. Is that because of during the early time there were more free people than it was? Because it was actually more free. Black people weren't always enslaved too. They actually were indentured at some point, and then it turned to slavery. So could it be that that's why that ledger is better because it's more descriptive and it's more a way for them to do that? Does that make sense? Did that make sense what I said?
Well, again, that's why I get so excited when I find plantation ledgers, otherwise known as day books, otherwise known as plantation books, or an enslaver's account books. Because a lot of times those will give not only family relate, it's weird. Someone's going to have to explain this to me one day, or maybe I'll finally understand it. Mothers and children, will typically find the relationship stated in those records, especially as the enslaver was documenting the births. So, you have Sam, son of Molly, born, I don't know, the 1st of March, 1815. That's actually, you can find that in the ledger. So that's when I get really excited about finding plantation books for people like Major Pierce Butler, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Patrick Henry, my Claiborne and my Braxton enslaving ancestors all the way over in Virginia. They're invaluable. They are invaluable. But bizarrely, rarely are fathers ever named.
Yeah.
If a
So
parent's going to be
Henry,
named, it's going to be a mom.
so Henry said it was just that it had more info like age and they grouped families sometimes. Okay. All right. That sounds
Mhm.
good. Gina Lewis had a question. She said, how can you break down an inventory group? I have names on inventory and court cases, but how do you know who belongs to who if they are all carrying the surname of the slave owner? Great question. Me and Brian can answer that.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Brian. You first.
R- I'm going to say if the relationship between different enslaved people in those documents isn't spelt out, um, sometimes naming conventions
Yep,
can
that's what
can
I was
give you a
thinking.
clue, especially if it's an unusual name. Again, for a client that I've been working with, her ancestry in Georgetown County, she had an ancestor with a really unusual name, Bunky, sometimes known as Bungie or Bungie. This is Georgetown County, South Carolina. And doing her research, I noticed two men with the same name appeared in the same inventory. One was clearly a generation older than the other one. And it was a fairly safe assumption that that was father and son, and DNA actually ended up proving the connection between those two. But no one
Okay.
else in that plantation had those names, just those two men. So like I said, there was a strong correlation between the two. Normally in court papers, it's kind of, I'm going to say from my own personal experience, it's kind of odd for enslaved family relationships not to be spelt out. Um, but I can kind of see that happening. Um, it just means having to try to research every single person that's mentioned. And if they start, and my question to her would be, if they began in a document, everyone having the same surname, did they all end up with the same surname, or did it change? And I'm thinking about the Hammonds in South
Mm,
Edgefield, South Carolina in particular. He made every single one of his freed people call themselves Hammond. And then you see a whole lot of black Hammonds in Abbeville. Sorry, not Edgefield, Abbeville, um, Indian Hill, Indian Falls. You see a lot of black Hammonds in 1870. There's only a handful of them in 1880. People
Right,
started changing. They're like, nah, we're not Hammonds. We don't want your name. This is who we are.
right, right. So, okay, um, I was gonna go a little bit different. First of all, like I said, I got lucky with with the one that I was doing with Martha because names were already there. But another way, if you found the the slave owner, and now the next thing you need to do is look at that 1870 census, because if they're living on that land and during that time period, look for labor contracts and look at the 1870 census. If they're living on that land and you're looking at somebody's age, let's say in 1870 somebody was 60 years old, but then you see a slave schedule, a 1850 slave schedule, 20 years younger. Look for someone who's 20 years younger on that slave schedule, and you might, and if he's the only person, if you get lucky and they're the only one that's that age, you might, that's a way to actually find them too. Because one of the ways that I knew that my great great grandmother was my great great grandmother is because I had a roundabout age of who, how old she was from the 1870 and 1880 census. So I knew that on that 1850 slave schedule, she was going to have to be about 15 years old. And she happened to be the only 15-year-old up there. Wasn't until Melvin had made a comment in one of his blogs where he was talking about the South Carolina slave schedule was grouped by family. It actually made me look back. I didn't realize, I didn't even pay it attention. And so when I looked back and I realized, oh my gosh, she's grouped like this her whole family. And then I'm like, well, wait a minute. And I started counting. That's when I was like, wait a minute. And I counted the 95 people. And then I turned around and looked in the book, slave record book, and I started counting. And it was the exact same amount. And then I started to see there was three family groups that he had on the slave schedule, and there were three family groups on his. That's how I started getting those names. So it's that one little thing that may make it open up for you. And
Mhm.
something as simple as how old they were in 1870 compared to what age they might have on the inventory or something to that, or the timing that the inventory was taken, that will allow you to give a roundabout when that person was born. That's a way a way to find out who they are.
Mhm. And again, another example would be my ancestor Daniel Henry Sheffey Jr. and his wife Margaret White. Found them easily in the 1870 census. Their year of birth very rarely changed in the records. I knew who enslaved them. Went to that 1850 census. There they were. There was Dan. There was Dan, and that one was again done by family groups. There was
Mm-hmm.
Daniel. There was Margaret. There were six kids. Then it was the next couple, which was actually Daniel's brother, his sister-in-law, his nieces and nephews. There was his
Right.
sister, her husband, her kids. You could actually work out who those individual family groups all were.
I think our most difficult was Moses though, because of his
Yeah.
kids and the spread out of the families. But it's the bottom line is that it's possible.
Mhm.
That
My
yeah.
advice would be to learn as much about that enslaved population around the 1850 and 1860 censuses. You have to do a lot of research, but
Mm-hmm.
get those inventories, get those deeds, get all of that, get all of those papers, do all of that research, and only then when you can actually name most, if not all, of the people that enslave or enslaved, and have a rough idea of how old they were, then you go into the slave schedules to start looking. Because just looking at a list of genders, whether they were black or mulatto, um, and roughly how old they were,
Okay.
that's not gonna mean anything. You're not gonna see patterns or look for that kind of information that you need to find. You need to know the information first, then go to that slave schedule and start working things out.
Yeah. So I hope we answered your question, Gina. I don't I think we did, but
I think we did too.
I think we did. I think we covered some stuff and gave you some ideas, if nothing else, on how to do that. But what's another thing as far as one of my things about African American research is not the research itself, but the fact that African American genealogists are not looked at to do research for other people.
Can I just hop in real quick, and then I promise we're going to come right back to that. There is one other thing that I wanted to mention. Um, oh, I can't believe that just went out of my head. We were talking about slave schedules. I was
Mhm.
thinking about colonial time period. Oh, it'll come. Oh, was that it? Oh, yes. So, in addition to inventories, there is these wonderful documents called deeds of partition or partition deeds. Sometimes an enslaver was such a large scale enslaver, say 60 enslaved people plus, he or she couldn't be bothered to sit down and figure out, oh, I want this specific enslaved people to go to this specific child or this specific heir. So what they did was to like, listen, y'all know I've got a lot of enslaved people. So what I'm going to do is they're going to be groups. My estate administrators are going to do the best job that they can. I've got 5 kids. I want each one of them to get roughly the same value of enslaved people. Well, it would be the estate administrators who actually sat down and worked out creating these groups of people that were called lots. So basically, say someone had 80 enslaved people, couple of kids, they wanted to group those 80 people in six lots. You had 6 lots of enslaved people. The estate administrators would work out who was going to comprise those 6 lots, would write on pieces of paper, lot 1, lot 2, lot 3, all the way down to lot 6, throw them in something. Could be a hat, could be a boot, I don't know what it was. And then each heir would actually pull out a number. And that was a group of enslaved people that they would get. And that was all logged down in what's called a partition deed. So you would know who got what lot of enslaved people. And I'm
Well,
finding
that's
I'm
a good
used.
thing that you gave because Gina just said that somebody died without a will. And
Mhm.
that was probably how that. So Gina, there's yet another way for you to look, to look stuff like that up.
Now, partition deeds aren't necessarily easy to figure out where they are, what, uh, what reference materials they're classed as. Sometimes you'll find them in probate records. The ones I'm working with now in Albemarle County, Virginia, are actually part of the court fiduciary records book. They're not even in probate books. They're in a whole other set of court document books. So maybe worth you kind of getting in contact with your local county court to say, I'm looking for a deed of partition or partition deeds before the Civil War. Can you tell me what series of books I need to look at from your county court that would actually have those documents in them?
And she said
Ne-
she did find them in lots.
yeah, there you
Mhm.
go. See, I know what I'm talking about occasionally.
Sometimes, hey,
Sometimes.
sometimes.
Now we can segue into what you were talking about.
Yeah, African American genealogists who are not looked upon, who are not grabbed. Um, I find that very, very sad. And I find it sad because I don't understand how you can make a movie about an enslaved person and not and always discuss the fact that black people don't really have a history before, but you doing before 1870, but you doing history on them before 1870. How do you do that? And how do you do that without me and getting my opinion on it? You understand what I'm trying to say? Like my opinion on what is supposed to be going on with my, like, I dare a person to try and do something on Martha Brooks because something can be done on her. Given the fact that who her enslaver was, something could definitely be done on her. But I've done so much research on my two times great grandmother that I have her thought processes in my head. So how you gonna do it when you don't even know how to find her first and foremost? You
So
understand what I'm saying?
if I understand what you're saying correctly, you would like to see Black genealogists have a parity and an equity with non-Black researchers and genealogists.
That well, I definitely want that, but I'm talking about more. I guess more so with filming. Like take Emancipation with Will Smith. I wonder. I really wonder. Did they have? It doesn't look like that they actually did any big research on him because number one, you don't think you can find black people during that time period. I don't think they did the research on him. I think that if this man may have had children. So there's DNA out there. This man, it was just different things about him. So the story Emancipation was more so, it was like what they thought happened to him as opposed to finding out if it actually did happen. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Or I think another example that people might be able to get their head around better, and I'm not going to name names. You can if you want to.
You know I will.
One thing that has consistently, everyone knows that Donya and I have known each other for years. And we cycle back and kind of revisit old conversations. And there's a genealogy research show for celebrities that told a Black celebrity that they could not find an ancestor because it was went before the 18th century. It involved slavery, and they were just told,
Oh
well,
no
we
no
can't
no no
find them.
no 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 no. It was easier than that.
Oh, was
You're
it?
talking about, yeah, you're talking about when Smokey Robinson was on Finding Your Roots. You know I'm a name names.
Yeah.
I'm a name names. So when Smokey Robinson was on Finding Your Roots and I was at my mom's house, and I promise you guys, they told him that they could not find his father because his parents were not listed. They couldn't find go any further for him because the death certificate that they had didn't have his parents the names up there. It said DK or don't know. I promise you guys within 5 minutes I went back and I found that information. I found it. So yes, that's what I'm talking about. If I don't know what kind of who they have on Finding Your Roots. I don't know. I don't know who the researchers are. I don't know their ethnicity, their nationality, whatever you want to call it. But I don't feel like we have a voice in that show. I just don't. And I'm talking about African American genealogists. This is my opinion. I'm not pushing it on nobody else. I need to say that. This is my opinion. I just do not feel that they have African American researchers in abundance. I noticed that on some of their shows lately, they'll show one. Those most recent ones, I've seen one. It's a lady. But I don't feel it's enough. I don't feel the voice is heard, and I don't feel our voices are heard. I just don't.
Mhm.
So
The other thing that I don't think that really gets factored into those kind of mainstream shows, because who do you think you are is just as guilty of this,
yeah.
is I'm going to put free people of color to one side. Well, no, actually, I'm not, because they're really just the other side of the same coin. I mean, oppression is
Mm-hmm.
oppression. Even though they were free, they were still marginalized. They had their own communities that were separate
Mm-hmm.
from the white communities. It's the same as being on a plantation, or what I like to refer to as a forced labor camp. I'm kind of coming around to the view that that's what these places should be called because that's what happened there. You need to think of those places of enslavement as a contained, I'm not even going to say community, it was like its own town.
Yeah.
You needed a passport to walk off your enslaver's property. That was the pass that you had to show the slave patrol so you didn't get in trouble. Think of
Yeah.
that piece of paper as a passport to be able to go
Mm-hmm.
out of the town that you're in to another town or to run errands for your enslaver or whatever it was. So you have two very constrained communities of people, free people of color in their communities and enslaved people within their forced labor camps, who had only a handful of choices. If you wanted to get married and have kids, you wanted to get married and have kids, well, you either got married to someone who was on the plantation who may or may not be related to you. We know from our Edgefield plantation, our enslaving families kept the enslaved within their families from generation to generation and also married their cousins who were enslavers. So basically, even in slavery period, cousins were marrying cousins. Free people of communities. You either left, if you didn't want to marry your cousin, you either left or you didn't get married, or you just accepted the fact that you were going to marry a cousin because marginalized community, lots of intermarriages within a couple of generations, most people are going to be related to each other. And I don't think that that gets factored into doing traditional research. I don't think people who aren't African Americans don't really kind of really think about that genetic um, implications
Right.
within those communities, and they don't really understand the kind of DNA results that they're looking at. We're dealing with that with the case, that cold case in Florida. It
Yeah.
mystifies the pair of us why
Oh,
that genetics team is only looking at the woman's paternal line,
yeah.
has completely ignored her maternal line, which is
Completely.
when it comes to Black genealogy, you cannot pick and choose what informational resources you're going to access. You have to access
Especially Black
everything.
genealogy out of Edgefield, South Carolina. Once they found out that those people, that this girl had a connection out of Edgefield, you could not, you cannot factor out the mother, the opposite, the maternal side, the other, whatever other parent it is that you're looking to. I swear to God, there's so many intermarriages in Edgefield that it is over the oh the headaches that you get from it. It's crazy.
Because we suspect that the unknown woman's parents were actually related to each other.
Yep. Yep.
And that by the official company that is researching her and her ancestry hasn't even factored that in. But the reason why Donya, Loretta, and I strongly believe that her parents were related, we know how they rolled in Edgefield, in Abbeville, in Aiken, in McCormick, in
Yes.
Greenwood, and all of those counties. We just
Yes.
know how these families rolled.
That's right. Melvin made a comment first before I get to Melvin comment, because if y'all saw me sit back for a minute, it was because of Melvin, and he is so it just was, it was because of
Mhm.
Melvin. But Angie, she was like, to your point, Donya, about involving African American family historians. Someone on the project has to insist on pulling in the expertise. We will always have to push into those spaces, and sadly, she is correct. But that's like that for everything. We just always have to push forward. But Melvin hit the nail on the head. He was like, Donya, I understand your point. In fact, some learn from us in our research, but yet want us to be invisible. See, that's that part. If I was somewhere where I could put an emoji up of Jada Pinkett pointing that part, that would be me. That part. Because that's what it is. It's crazy. It's absolutely ludicrous. So
Mhm. And Gary Franklin also made a great point saying you study not only your bloodline, but their communities, the fan club, the fan, family and
that's right.
neighbors way of researching people.
That's right. That's right. So okay, it is, the show is almost over. And again, you guys are great. We missed you. This conversation was awesome. Um, we have some really good news. We have some
We
exciting
do
news.
some really exciting news.
Yeah, we want to get that out there. Okay, so some of y'all, some of you guys that watch the show are my family, and y'all know me. Y'all know how much I absolutely adore Jill Scott. Like, she is just the bomb singer. Well, about a year ago, there was a conversation they had with a company, African Ancestry, and some information was given that made one of the hosts on Jill Scott's podcast cry. And it hurt me to my heart because the information that they gave was just not true, to the point where I tagged Brian on the whole Twitter conversation because it was a conversation. So,
Can I just
what?
say quickly,
Yeah.
the information that really upset you was this. Basically, the women who had black haplogroups were told that they didn't have haplogroups because they were black.
No, that's not what it was.
Oh, that's not what it
She
was.
personally was told that she didn't have a haplogroup because her beginning mother was a white woman. That's what she was
That's
told.
what it was.
So they told her that she didn't have a haplogroup. Everybody has a haplogroup. So
Yeah.
anyway, one thing led to another or whatever, and I'm constantly contacting them and telling them, look, we can help you. Let us do this, let us do that, blah, blah, blah. So finally, you guys, we are going to be interviewed by the J.Ill podcast. We're excited. I need to get my starstruckness out the way because I freaking love Jill Scott. But yeah, we are definitely going to be on there on the show. Now that is not a live show. It is pre-recorded. So once we get the date, we will let you guys know. And it is a podcast, it's not a video. So we are going to try to see what we can do and see if we can get it to our show. But we will be, talking about African American genealogy and African American genealogists as a whole. Very excited about
Indeed. And I guess to kind of wrap up the kind of last point that we were talking about on the show, um, I just, on the other side of the coin, I just don't feel that African American and Black genealogists get the flowers or the props or the recognition that we deserve.
that. No, we don't.
Because our ancestry is unique to this country, because our ancestry is unique to this country, our history is unique to this country, how we research our ancestry is unique
Yes.
for us as a people.
Yes. Everything about it. So we'll be back Sunday and we will, it's not enough time to talk about the next show. I think it's what's the other guy. But anywho, I'm Donya.
I'm Brian. We will see you next week, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on E360 TV and all the usual places where you tune in.
Yes. Love you guys. We missed you. We really
We
did miss
have
you.
we have
We
missed
had
you.
a lot of stuff going on, but we missed you guys. So we'll see you next week.
Take care. Happy Mother's
Take
Day.
care. All right now. Bye guys.